Hello, hello. Let's just wait a bit. If somebody's here. And let me just put on Twitter that we are live. I guess we're live, I don't know. Hello, Ole, good to see you. So now I can see that the chat thingy works that I've put on here. It's a little plugin that will display the chat messages on stream. I was hoping that works, and it seems that it works. Perfect, cool. What's my username? 23, and then let's tweet that, and let me also put it here. If you want to retweet that. Hey, awesome. I got 2 viewers. Danny's here, good to see you, hey. Let me just see if that's all working out. I haven't done this in a while. I wanted to do this much more often, but yeah, it looks good. Okay. Wanted to do this much more often, but didn't have a chance to do it lately. Is my audio fine? I turned it down a little bit from the last time. If there's any problem, just let me know, and then I'll try to come up with a fix. So yeah, how's it going? I'm doing fine. I have a long weekend ahead. Again, Austria has another public holiday on Monday, so I'm really looking forward to that. Cool. So I'm gonna wait a little bit longer. Maybe there are other people joining in the meantime. Let me just see how things are going over here, and then we can decide on what I'm actually going to do today, because my plan was to kind of show off how React Query works in the more low-level stuff, so how you can build your own adapter, what happens under the hood, and so on. And I have prepared a little bit for a lit adapter, which is a web framework that uses custom elements. At first I thought I wanted to do some jQuery stuff, but that was a little too much DOM manipulation for me, and I don't know, maybe it's also cool, but I wanted to try out the lit elements for quite some time, and I thought it might be cool to see, because this is really just JavaScript and custom elements, how this would integrate with React Query. So that's something we can definitely take a look at. Other than that, I could show what we've been doing with React Query version 5 lately. There have been some cool new additions in the API that we have there. And also, if you have any questions on anything React Query related, that would be also something I can do. So let's see what I'm going to start with. I don't know, any preferences from anyone who's here to what we should start with? I did plan for about 2 hours maybe today, depending on how fast things progress. All right, then let's do that. So let me see. I do have a little bit prepared. I'm not doing this from scratch. I have done it once, but that was some time ago, so I'm pretty sure I will be struggling a little bit. But what I have prepared is pretty much a code sandbox. I hope that this still works. It's the lit TypeScript templates. They're official, like some official template that I cloned. And I can actually fork that again because I don't want to like mess around with the template. And it has no dependencies yet apart from lit and parcel, which is used as a bundler, where we have our TypeScript file where we get the like the source code in, and then we have this panel app thing, and the panel app is loaded. It's a custom element that's loaded from the source component TS, and then we just have an import from this lit app, and this lit app is just a class that extends lit element. Lit uses these decorators, which I'm not really a fan of, but whatever. If it works, it works. And it's called panel app, and then we're just rendering this in our HTML as panel app. Yeah, and then we can see hello from lit app, and if we actually go there and we just tk photos lit app, that works. Perfect. Why is it? Okay, because I spelled my name wrong. Yeah, see, that's it. I need to spell the name right. It knows that this was wrong. No idea what that was. Could be just a hiccup. So generally this should just work. Okay, and the style is actually coming from this. Where's the blue text actually coming from? There must be some style somewhere. Oh, it's here. Yeah, so there's some style embedded here that puts the color to blue. I'm just gonna remove that because I don't think I'm gonna do much styling today. Okay, so what can we take a look at? So one of the things that I wanted to do is let's go to the TanStack documentation and let's take a look at the standard example, which is really just the simple one. That's like I think many people will know about this example. It's basically fetching the repo data that we have from the GitHub API, and it displays like the stats and the detail and the name of the repository, and it also renders the DevTools, obviously. So we have an app that wraps a query client provider and has the example app, and there we have a use query. It has a query key, has a query function, renders something from the GitHub API, a loading, an arrow state, and then renders some JSX. This is pretty much the most basic example that we can have. Yeah, my dependency. Okay, thanks for pointing that out. The dependencies isn't. I don't know. The last time I tried this out, this was the most up-to-date thing. Maybe this has changed, but I'm totally happy to just go to the latest version, 2.7.0, and see if that works. Or I hope they have. Yeah. So at least the basic example still works. Thanks for pointing that out. We can go from here. So my plan is to re-implement this basic example that we have in React and re-implement this inside lit. And to do this, we need to first add a dependency. So let's take, we're not going to take React Query because React Query is the React adapter for it, but we can take a separate package that's the query core. So the @TanStack Query core is the like only TypeScript class-based things that we have in our code base, and every of our framework adapters actually re-exports the query core. So we can try and just add dependency to this. This is every time failing and I need to reload it. Okay, cool. But now we should have a dependency on our query core. Here it is, and we're actually going to use like, does this can I do 5.x? Does that work? No. I need to look it up on npm. Like, what is the, because I want to use version 5, because I also have to like dog food my own things. and also promote how cool version 5 is. We can show off maybe some a couple of things. And the latest version is 5.0.0 alpha 38. So let's go with that one. Oh, this was, yeah, this was the query core. Okay. Because sometimes the query core and the React adapter do have different dependencies, like different versions, because not every release releases all the packages. Like here we can see we had 32, 33, 34, and then 38, and the ones in between, or there's also some missing things in there. That's just how our release setup is set up. It just releases the things that actually have changes in between them. So 38. Let's go. Okay, still there. Cool. Then maybe I do have a blog post about like looking at the details of React Query, the inside of it, how all of this like works together. I can put this away. And I don't know if you've read this this article, anyone, but it kind of like explains how React Query works under the hood and works together. So what we're going to see is, I'm going to thank you for cross-posting the link into the chat. I always forget that. I'm just going to move forward to the like the architecture picture because I think that is the most interesting one out of all of them. So here we can actually see that the things that we have, so we have a query client, that's like the class that you create initially, and the query client contains actually a query cache. So every time when you do a new query client, you implicitly also create the cache. That's also why it's so important to not have an unstable query client, because every time you create a new query client, you actually also create a new query cache, and then you throw away your data. So just as a side note, if we go into our function here and we take this, that this is React code now, right? If we take this new query client and we actually put it like inside the app function, I see people do this sometimes, and then it works in this example. But if because there is no re-render of the app, because everything happens in the example component, but then you might add a router on top of it, right? And then every time when your app re-renders for some other reason, it would actually create a new instance of the query client, and that would throw away all the cache, and then you would get like blinking loading states and kind of unpredictable behavior. So if you want to use the query client inside your app, which is also a valid use case if you, for example, bundle a micro frontend and you can't really have like a global instance that you depend on because you make multiple versions of your app, or if you do server-side rendering and you don't want to share it between multiple users. What I always do, exactly as Moshifan has said here, is we are going to do a React.use state around it, right? And then we can call a new query client here, and then obviously we need to destruct it here. And this is kind of like the way I do constant initializations. So you could also extract them with TypeScript is a bit more, I think, a bit more like typings, but you could do like something like a use constant, and that's basically just like initializer init, right? And then we're just gonna do React.use state init, and then like 1, or actually 0. Right, yeah, we need the first element of the tuple. So that's kind of like how I would implement the use constant hook if you ever need that. There's also a way to implement it with refs, but the problem about refs is that they don't have a like a lazy initializer, because this function is only called once. So with ref, you have to do like an if statement, and then the typings also get a bit weird. And whatever happens, don't like use memo here, right? If you do this, then with use memo, it will also work, obviously. But use memo is not a semantic guarantee of how, like, it doesn't guarantee that it only runs when the dependencies change. So it, what's up here? Is it like, I don't know, sometimes Code Sandbox just craps in on me. So use memo is not a semantic guarantee that that it will only run if the dependencies change. React can at any time decide to throw away whatever it has stored in use memo, because it's just a performance optimization. It's not a guarantee. And I actually also have a blog post about this. Let's just do use state for one-time initializations. It's that one. I'm also going to put this, if that's the right one, yeah. Small argument, put this into the chat. This is something that I think some people sometimes miss, and then it's like a lot of bug reports that I'm getting are about this topic of like, I accidentally recreate my query client. And the query client, to go back to the topic, and let's do use state again, it contains a query, or let's just actually, yeah, let's just leave it here, whatever, that's fine. And it actually contains the query cache. This is maybe not so obvious because you just create a query client and you don't know what a client actually is. It's just something that React Query needs. But inside of it, it contains the query cache. And you can also pass your own query cache if you do like new query cache. And then it gets auto-imported. And this is actually what happens under the hood. And there's also a mutation cache. And that kind of has the new mutation cache. So this is kind of the default behavior, but then you can also pass some properties to the query cache, like the global callbacks and some other options, I think. And if you were to invoke it like this, it might become a bit more obvious that the client contains the cache, and the cache is where your data lives in memory. But you can, of course, leave that out. Then this would just happen per default, like a new empty query client will be created. So yeah, important to not do this inside your where's the image in here? Important to not do this inside your application without actually making sure that it's stable. So that's the query client, and it holds the cache, as we said. And then there's this thing called observers, and the observers are, I always say it's the glue between like the core that lives outside of React and then, or whatever framework you're using, and then the framework specific things. So in the framework specific things, we have, of course, the hooks, the use query, and the provider that is also React specific. And we can, inside of use query, what actually happens is an observer is created. And the observer is also a class. It's just a JavaScript, TypeScript thingy. And this is what communicates with the cache and then does some optimizations. So when we write a new framework adapter or some framework specific code, what we are getting from the query cache is not like a hook, like use query, because that is React specific. What we are getting is the query observer and the query client. So what we need to do when we write something new is basically we need to create a query observer, and that observer is going to get all the options that we pass in, the query key, the query function, and so on. And that observer has a subscribe method because it can subscribe to a specific query. So we can subscribe to something, and then we need, like this subscribe takes a callback, and this callback is always invoked when something happens that this observer is interested in. So when the query says, okay, you probably need to re-render now. And then the observer itself does some more optimizations, and then it notifies, this arrow here, it notifies the framework specific layer. This happens in the callback. And then basically all the framework specific layer has to do is kind of like re-render your component or whatever it is that you have. If you're not doing something component driven, like with jQuery, then you would need to find some other way to update the DOM. But when we're talking about React or also lit elements, what we need to do is to kind of like trigger re-render of our component so that it then kind of reads the latest value from the query cache and then renders it. Okay, Graham, let me just read the question in the chat. I'm currently working on a redesign and adding TanStack Query into pages as we make them. The pages are scattered across a few different components, and we didn't want to wrap the overall app. I made a singleton class for the query client. Not pretty, but it worked. Yeah. If it works, it works. I'm like, I don't have too many opinions on that, I think. Like how you structure your code or your queries, or like if you make them all global, or yeah. I've also seen people structure it into classes, so I think that's That's a perfectly fine thing to do. Okay, so with this architecture in mind, we can probably go into our lit app and try to like go into the app itself. What I'm going to do here is I'm not going to do something reusable, right? I'm just going to really like, because here we could also, this is like the React example, we could extract it. Let's go to the real React example. Here is it. Yeah. We could extract it to a custom hook, or we could like do some other layering around it. I'm just going to raw inline all of this here, because first of all, it's just a demo. We're not building a real adapter, and second of all, I don't really know much about lit. I literally just googled how the syntax works a little bit. So the first thing I'm actually going to do, and I'm also going to hard code this for now, is we are going to just take the options that we want here. There's this object, like query key and query function, and I'm going to just copy this over and going to hard code this here, like const query options equals, and then this object here. I don't know if I would need to, let's maybe, oh, there is no Axios. Okay, cool. So we need some way of doing data fetching, because React Query doesn't really do this, so we have to add Axios. And then we kind of need to, let me just take a look here again. We just need to probably import this, right? So import Axios from Axios. I hope this works now. Yep, it's here. And then this also works. Okay, so now we have the query options. And I just move this window over here. The next thing we need to do is probably go into our lit app, and I think the way lit does this, or at least from what I've seen, is they have this kind of reactive properties. So what we can do is we can define a property inside of here, like this our add property. This, and then it can be auto import from the lit decorators, and then we can do like a result, and I'm just going to assign it to an empty object. Let me just see why this isn't working. Oh, this syntax. Okay, so this is, I think, kind of how it works. And then we have a result, and we're going to fill this result later on. Right. And so now when we have like the query options and we have the result defined, what we need to do is we need to create a query observer. And what we usually do in React world is we just create the observer in local state. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create it as a class property as well, but it doesn't have to be reactive. So we can just call it like observer and then equals like new query observer. And the query observer we need to import now. Import query observer from TanStack Query core, and that should work. Yeah, and new query observer, not obviously type errors because it needs two arguments. It needs a query client and it needs the options. And the client is basically like in use query land, when you call use query, you don't actually need to pass the client because it can read it from the context. You can pass it to use query as well if you don't want to use React context, but here we basically just have to kind of like pass it manually because this is just like there is no dependency injection in all of this like classes that we have. So we need to pass the client manually and then the options. So what we're going to do with the client is I'm just going to like simulate what we always do. We're going to just create it outside of it. So we're going to do const client equals new query client. This is what you'd usually do, just create the query client outside of your application, and then you can like pass it to the provider. But here we can just do it like this. We can pass the client here, and then we can pass the query options. Yeah, and at least that compiles already. So let me just read up on the questions that are coming in the meantime. Sorry, I'm like when I'm focused, I'm not reading the questions, but I'm trying to. If you don't know much about it, you might want to put it in a reactive controller or use this. Yeah, I think this is not this, right? So we have this dot observer. Yeah, So I think it's put on the Discord, but maybe we can refactor that. I'm just going to try to get it to work, and then we can refactor that. Why Axios over fetch? I was just copying the example. I don't know. I have no like preference over Axios over fetch. One thing that you have to keep in mind when you're using fetch, and I think this is something that like not most people don't know, but what gets like left out of all the examples, also when you take a look at the Next.js example, everything that there is, when you're just using plain fetch, you do not get error propagation the way you would expect it to just work. Yeah, like most people would expect it to work, because what fetch does, and I think this is in my FAQ article as well. FAQs. Yeah, this one. Like there are like a bunch of FAQs. I think there are 4 of them. Why are my updates not shown? The query client is not stable. That's what I talked about before. That's like one of the things that can happen. And the other thing is like, why do I not get errors? And the main reason, like 90% of the reasons, is the fetch API. Because when you do the fetch API, and this is like all the examples, even if you go to like the Next.js docs and say, yeah, you can just do await fetch in your server components. It works, of course, but when you have a status code that's in the 400 or 500 range, they are not treated as errors, because they will just, from fetch perspective, the fetch actually succeeded. You will get like, yay, the fetch is okay, but you want to treat it as an error. And that is what Axios is giving to most people like out of the box. And if you're just using fetch, you need to provide like your own wrapper around it, or use KY. I'm also using like KY on GitHub, which is basically the Axios-like API, but built around fetch. And it also treats non-2xx status codes as errors. So I think that's like for most fetch web applications that you do, this is kind of like what you want, but fetch doesn't do it. So if you forget about it, then the React query cannot get your query into an error state, because it can only get into an error state if you have a rejected promise. Because it's not, React query is not about data fetching. It's about, I think I've said this a couple of times already. It's about like promise-based state management. So a resolved promise means good data. A rejected promise means no good data, right? So that's where it goes into like the retries. That's where it goes into the errors. And then you need to check for this response.ok with fetch, and then you need to throw a new error. And it kind of like boilerplates the stuff a lot. But when you just do axios.get or ky.get, and then kind of like unwrap the data that's inside of it, it kind of like 400, 500, it will propagate the error up, and you also get like good typings somewhat for the error. So you have this Axios error. You can use like Axios is Axios error on an error, and that will properly type narrow things. So I don't see like a real good reason to switch away from it at the moment, at least. We're also using it at work a bunch, so there's that. Okay, back to the example. We have an observer. The observer gets the client and gets the query options, and then as the observer needs to subscribe. And from what I've seen, we want to subscribe like once when the component basically mounts. So there's this thing called ed connected callback, which is a callback that gets called when the custom element basically mounts for the first time. It's like a component did mount for, at least that's the way I see it, for these lit elements. And what we can do here is basically observer. This.observer. See, it's on the disk scope. So this.observer.subscribe. And then subscribe basically gets a callback. And this is what gets, here we can do console log update. So this is the function that gets called when like the observer wants to re-render your application. And yeah, what we need to do, I think, is, I don't know, I have this in my finished example, is we can super.connected callback. I don't know if that's really necessary, but whatever, let's just keep it in. Maybe it doesn't work otherwise. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. Makes sense that you need to do that if you override it. Is the main signal just as main? Okay. So now we have this update here, and the observer returns a unsubscribe. So usually in React, what you would do is you would just put this in a use effect, or you would put this in a usesync external store, and subscribe always returns an unsubscribe function. That's what we see here. And you can return this to actually do the unsubscribe. I don't know if we can do this here, but there's a second callback that is the disconnected callback. And I think I would want to like unsubscribe here. And basically like what I would do is this.unsubscribe equals this was a little subscribe. So I would basically kind of like store this in here. I don't know if that's, yeah, I need to probably define it. So we're gonna go like unsubscribe, and then this is going to be a function of void, and it has no initializer. So actually we need to kind of like do this, I guess. Unsubscribe, we have like a typo, yeah. Unsubscribe, unsub. Should be good enough. The run candidate option is possibly undefined. Oh, wrong question mark. Cool. Here it goes. Right. So now we can like, if this gets called after the connected callback, here we initialize it, we store it, and then we basically unsubscribe after we're done with everything. Okay. Let's take a look at our fetch again and see how we can actually, like, there's the query client, there's the observer that has the data. It now, I can see the types referred to any here. That is not good. That's probably because the query, oh yeah, Axios returns any. Okay, so let's add some types. Should we add Zod, like real runtime validation of that thing? Yeah. Okay, quick question. Should we just define the types, or should we validate the types at runtime with Zod? Is that interesting? I don't know, maybe not. Okay, cool. Then we just define the types. So we're going to have like, what's it going to be? Type repo data equals, and what's on the repo data? We already know what's on it because we've rendered it before, like its name, description, and we need like those couple of things. Okay, so we have name string, and then description string, and then subscriber count, probably a number, I guess. And I'm just gonna copy paste this over here. Stargazers count. It's also a number, and then the last one that we need is the forks count. Let's also say that is a number. And then one way to do this, because like there everything is just probably any, we can do result.data as repo data, which is as good as it gets on here. And then we have the options, and then the observer is hopefully typed to repo data. Yes, it is. Repo data, repo data. Okay, that's good. That's what we wanted to see. So how do we get the data into our result now? Well, the thing is, you don't actually get a result like until you have fetched. So on the first render, you basically have nothing. And yeah, get method doesn't have a generic type. It does not, I think. Oh, it does have a generic type. Cool. It doesn't really matter. I think this is just the same thing. I think like this makes you feel like you're not lying as much as you do, but you still are. Let me just see if that. Yeah, that works the same way. And it's a pity that it defaults to any. I think in KY they have the same thing, but actually the .get defaults to unknown, which is a lot better because you instantly see if you have missed like adding something, and you also cannot leak the any around. So yeah, you can do this. It's literally the same amount of like maybe like this syntax makes us feel a little bit better, but it's the same amount of like type unsafety that you'd had with a type assertion. But it's good. That also works. So we have the observer, and we need to kind of get the result on the first render, right? Right now it's just an empty object, but we don't really have a result until we've actually subscribed. That's the problem. The subscription is what actually triggers the data fetching. So what we offer on the observer is a method called get optimistic result. And get optimistic result, it also needs the options. Okay, let me just see what it doesn't work. We're going to see this in a second. And optimistic result basically looks at the options. It's going to say, hey, is this going to make a fetch in the future? And that's where it's going to give us the correct like state and also the correct data, because sometimes we have like initial data defined here, or we're going to have like placeholder data defined. And in all those cases, our query won't go into loading state. It will go directly into success state, because it's kind of like with initial data, you always have data in the cache. So we can get you to success state faster without showing that loading state. And that's what the get optimistic result does. And I just need to find out what the error here is. Argument of type is not designed. Defaulted query observer options. Yeah. Okay. There is one thing that all the adapters are also doing inside of it, is they are defaulting the query options. So what you can do on the query client is you can actually define, I think maybe much of you might know this, you can define default options, and then you can say query, and then you can say like, or is it's queries, and then you can say like stale time 5000, and then all of your queries should get that stale time. But that only works if we're actually like combining the code. What we can also do is like client.set query defaults, which I also like a lot, where you can say like everything that starts with repo data should get a specific stale time or whatever, right? So you can have a more fine-grained defaults, like this assigns the defaults to everything, and this or you can say like to-dos, right? And if you then structure your query keys to be like to-dos and then list, or to-dos and then detail, you can say everything for that feature is going to get these default options. And that's what you can do with set query defaults. But there needs to be something that actually like combines all these things. And that is the method called default query options. I just need to, yeah, it's on the client, of course. So what we actually need to pass is, and I'm just going to do this outside now because we need it a bunch of times probably, is like, let's do this here. Const query options is, so we need to call like query client, or you know what, let's inline it. It's more in line with what would actually happen. So it would need query client.default query options, or it's client called default query options, and then we pass the query options to it. And what this method does, okay, there is an implementation here. What this method does is basically it's going to look up, like in the query client, if this specific client has defined any sort of options for this query key that comes in, or basically on the global default, and then it's going to apply it and pass it to the query that it's going to create. That's kind of important to get right, and I'm happy that the types reminded me of it, because you cannot pass like any options in there. You need to pass the defaulted options in it, because what the defaulted options actually do on type level, and I'm a bit proud that I made this, is that they take in query options and they return defaulted query options. So that's kind of, that's like pretty much the same as the options, except that some of the things will always get defaulted inside of it, even if you haven't provided it. And then we can kind of make I don't know what the actual difference is. Yeah, it always has throw on arrow defined, for example, or refetch and reconnect. So we can kind of like expect these things to always be there. And that makes it a bit easier to work with it internally, because we don't need to do like null checks or undefined checks where they are clearly not necessary, because internally we will always have them, because we always default it on the on the framework adapter levels. So we need to do this here, and I think we also need to do it here, which is why I kind of wanted it. We can like const defaulted options if that's like something that bothers us, and then we can pass them here. And we can also pass them here. Okay, so now we should actually have a result, and the result should now be of type query observer result, which means we can for the first time actually go into our render function and actually render some results. So I'm going to render, like, let's copy paste this over from here. I want to render this, like exactly this, maybe without the DevTools. We can see if we can add the DevTools later, because we have great new DevTools for version 5. Okay, where's the formatting gone? Well, okay. And obviously this interpolation doesn't work because this isn't really JSX. I think it's just a real like string. So we have to use string template interpolation. And then we can do this. And now we obviously don't have data. We don't have his fetching, but we can, it's actually, I think it's actually on the result. So we can do like const data and is fetching equals result, this dot result. And then it will tell us that data is potentially undefined because it is on the first render. So what we are missing is these kind of early returns here. So we can just put them here, I guess. Is loading and is error. And then error. Whoops. Oh, we don't need is error. Okay. And what was of undefined reading name? Oh, is loading. It's not is loading anymore. It's is pending. Shouldn't matter. Subscribers count. Subscribers count. Okay. Is it subscriber or subscribers? It's subscribers. Okay. It just looks like a string interpolation. At runtime, it's a function call. Okay. Yeah. Tag templates. You can do whatever you want, like GraphQL or whatever in string literal templates. That's pretty good. Okay. So what are we seeing now? We are seeing an infinite loading state. Cool. So let's do console log rendering and then like this dot result. See what we're getting. We are rendering with status pending. That's version 5. Fetch status is idle, and a bunch of like other things. Okay, and the thing is, because this is like we are getting this this status because this is what the optimistic result gives us, right? It tells us, hey, you will be in pending state. And then we can actually see this update is getting called afterwards. So there's the subscribe and there is the update. So we are getting an update from subscribe. Is this where the DevTools come into play? I'm going to do the DevTools last because I don't know. They're written in Solid.js, and the new ones, they're pretty cool. Is this where the DevTools come in? Yeah, we could try for the DevTools. I haven't checked how they actually integrate with React Query, but I can actually take a quick look how the query does. So in case you don't know the new DevTools, we have framework agnostic DevTools that you can actually render everywhere. Thanks to Aryan, who contributed this. He is our Solid Query maintainer. And if we take a look, like they are now rendered with Solid, but you can embed them anywhere. And they also look much better than like the ones we had before. Sorry, Tanner. The new ones are better. So they're now an agnostic, and we could definitely just take this, but I need to look it up how the DevTools are actually rendered in React. So now I'm like, those are the DevTools. There are a bunch of props. And so what are we doing in React? I've never actually looked at this implementation here. So we get the client. Okay. We initiate the TanStack Query DevTools and store them in state. See, that's how you do it. Then we have an effect, some positioning, position. Okay, it's just we have to react to the positions with a bunch of effects. And then we render a diff with a ref, an empty diff, and that's actually where the DevTools go in. And the ref is a use ref, and I think we have to pass the ref then to the DevTools. Do we not? How do the DevTools know where to render to? Ah, here, DevTools.mount into the ref. Yeah, we could totally do that. There's a lit wrapper for React. What do you mean, a lit wrapper? Just open it up. Oh, we could use we could embed the React query DevTools inside lit. That sounds lit. Amazing. Yeah, and then we need React. Yeah, I think I'm gonna try that. It's actually, I think it's not too much trouble to also get this to work. I just don't know how would refs, like how would you attach a ref to a diff, or like you just need a reference to that element. Okay, let's maybe try that at the end, right? Because I know how to fix the problem here. I was just like teasing towards the problem. So maybe there's another quick question. Okay, how do you feel about the app directory as of now? I will cover that later. Yes, app directory. Perfect question. Remind me after I'm done with the with that sandbox. Okay, so what we have seen is we are actually like get this rendering, and then we do get another update in. But every time this this update comes in, we are not re-rendering our component. And what we basically need to do is we need to like create a new result, or actually just take the result from React query and store it in this result property, because those properties are actually reactive. So what we can do is we can do result equals, or this dot result equals, and then I think what should be enough is, I know what we do in code is we just get a new optimistic result, because this has something to do with React and concurrent rendering and stuff like that. We need to always get the latest one. But I think what we could also do is just this.observer.get current result, which should contain the, here it is, which should contain the current result. So pretty cool stuff happening here, because what happened just now is that every time the observer gets an update, we basically like tell our component to re-render with the current result, and then we put the current result into the result property. Lit takes care of, because we are writing to this result, to actually re-render our component. And now we basically have gone full circle. So let me just put in a quick sleep, const sleep, like new promise resolve set timeout resolve ms. And then what we're gonna do in here is we're gonna make this async, and we're going to return this, and we're going to await sleep 500, just to make this like a bit and slower, yeah, or maybe like 1,000. Right. So with that, we have like a working version of React Query inside of this, with basically everything that you want. You can mount this multiple times. You get query deduplication. You can like have each observer select different parts of the state and re-render only according to this. You will get the window focus refetching. Basically everything that React Query offers. It's like I think we're done with this almost. There are still a couple of things I want to show, and one of them is that I've been missing is that you actually, and this is what the query client provider in React world does, because as we've seen, like there are two things in the React world. There's like use query. This is what we have like implemented now with the observer, but then there's also the query client provider. And the query client provider not only does like providing your client over to your application with React context. It also does, and I actually just found this out because I've seen that the window focus refetching isn't working. It also mounts your query client, because the client has a client.mount method, and you have to like mount and unmount it. And you can do this on your app level. Usually you just do this once because you only have one provider. Here in this example, I would just do it again for this component. So we're going to do like this dot, or it's just client, right? It's just client.mount. We'll mount it here. And then we'll do client.unmount when our component unsubscribes, because it's the only one that's using it. Yeah, and with that, we should actually be able to get also the background refetching going. We won't see the background refetching in version 5 anymore when we're just going like from left to right with the with focusing the window with just this you know, clicking into the iframe that used to happen here. Or even if you have like your browser DevTools open, this is one of the things that tripped people up tremendously, was when they like opened the browser DevTools and then they were clicking around here and they were clearing the network, and then they were clicking into like the application, and it was actually like refetching. And you would go here and you would clear it and you would click again and it would refetch. Right? This is basically the version 4 behavior. I think we can even see this when we go in here. This is one of the things that we have fixed in version 5, and go back to like what was actually meant with this window focus refetching. So here, if you're going and you're clicking, you can see, oh, there's a request. Well, let me clear that request. Oh, there it is again. Let me clear. Why am I like always getting a request? It's like, okay, every window focus is basically like making a request. But since the browser DevTools are actually a separate window, you would constantly get this, and it would be super annoying. And we fixed this in version 5 to like, you can now clear this and open it and like click in here, click around, and you won't get that, but you will get the background refetch if you're actually like focusing the window. So if I'm going to a different window and then I'm coming back, we are seeing the updating. And this is what React Query was always about, right? To like make a refetch when the user focuses the window, like really brings the window to the foreground and not kind of like clicks into the window. Yeah, I think that was a cool improvement. Hello, Kevin. Yeah, Kevin is the React table maintainer. So cool to see you here. Yes, I know. It's also like I have this in one of my blog posts where I'm saying that, you know, in development mode you might want to turn window focus refetching off, or you might want to like be aware at least that there are fetches happening because of this. Also, like if you have like a button and you want to click that button and you go in here and you turn it off, and then the first thing is you click that refetch button, you're actually seeing two requests, one coming from the invalidation and the other one coming from the button click. So there's kind of like two fetches going on. How did we fix this? It was actually a discussion opened by someone and a contribution that was done externally, because we had like too many events. I think what we were looking at, if we take a look at the focus manager, not the test, like the real one, we are now only listening to the visibility change event. And before that, if we compare this to compare with branch main, what we were previously listening to was the focus and the visibility change event. And we were only listening to the focus event because visibility change wasn't supported in all the major browsers when we made this. But we've updated our browsers list. We're now like stricter with what we support. But that means we don't need to listen to the focus event anymore, because everything supports the visibility change event, at least everything that we would like to support. So we just removed some codes to fix this feature, which is always amazing. Like, you just remove some code and it just works. So what is also brought for us was like, we had a bunch of reports that I also didn't know how to fix, where you would oops, this goes away, where you would have, for example, a file upload. And every time the file upload dialog goes up, this is also like a separate window. And then when you like choose your file to do the file upload, it would then refocus the document and this focus event would trigger. So there were just a bunch of false positives with this focus event. And by just listening to visibility change, this is kind of like what this window focus was always about. Does the window now come into the view? Is the user coming back from his lunch break, their Twitter break, whatever, and are now really looking at the window? Every time, whoops, that was wrong. Every time this is happening, you're like coming back from somewhere and then you are getting this updating, you are getting the refetch, but not if you're just clicking into it. So I think that's pretty neat. And another cool reason to try out version 5. Yeah, so these are the things that are now already working. There is one more thing that isn't yet working, and that is, let me just quickly add a refetch button, because like if I don't have the dev tools, I think I do need a refetch button. So let's just add another button and refetch. And I'm just going to take the refetch that's returned from here. And we are going to, yeah, you know what? I'm just cheat a little bit. I just copy paste this here over here. There you go. Right, so there's an on click and then client.refetch queries, that also works. Yeah, so that just refetches everything. So now we get that refetch button and we get updating. That all works. Cool. So the feature that I want to show that's still missing, because that is also an observer level feature, is some sort of render optimizations that we have. Before that, let me just quickly look at this here. Is this the discussion? Yes, that is the discussion. There was a very good discussion that led to us doing this in version 5, and I've also linked a couple of like issues that were fixed by that. So there's also like contributor made like videos of the before and after. It was really cool. I love this. If you make an open source contribution and you make a PR like this, that's just lovely. Okay, so this is our sandbox, the correct one. Now, what we are seeing is every time we click here, we get updates and then rendering and then update and then rendering. And that is obviously because we are going into fetching state and idle state. And that's fine because we're actually fetching, like showing this updating here on the screen. But what happens if we're not doing that? So if we remove these fetching and we are not using these fetching, like if you know how React Query works, what it should be doing now is it shouldn't actually re-render your component, because the observer knows that nothing that it's interested in changes. And what we're doing is to achieve that is a feature called property tracking. So we take a look at what are you actually using of the this.result field. You're only taking data is pending and error. And if none of these actually change, then we shouldn't re-render our component. But that's not happening here. So every time we click refetch, we are actually re-rendering it. It doesn't matter here because it's a cheap component, but you still get like these render cycles like between fetching and idle. And this is not how React Query works per default. Like the query core works like this because the feature, like because Solid, for example, doesn't need it, right? They don't have re-renders. They don't care. Like that's why we like really haven't built that feature into the core. It's available in the core, but it's not on per default in the core. So what we need to do is we need to, instead of like just giving us this get current result back, what we actually need to do is we need to track the result. And there is a method available that's called this.observer.trackResult. And this basically returns not the real result object, but it creates a new, it's not a proxy object, but it creates a new object with object defined property where we are tracking the getter access. It's a bit like not as advanced as proxies because we don't need to look deep into things. It's just a shallow comparison, but it does the job very well. And it can then check like what are you using from the result. And if we're clicking refetch now, wait a second. What we should be seeing is that every time we refetch, because nothing changes that we're using, we shouldn't actually see these we should see the updates, because the updates are what's getting in, but we shouldn't see the re-renders as far as I'm concerned. Track results. So what I've been doing in the other sandbox where I had this was I was like using get optimistic result. Maybe that's what I need to do. Let me just see. No, it's still not working. Interesting. Track result. Oh, I don't have the implementation here. I was pretty sure that it was working. Wait a second. It's working in the other sandbox that I have prepared. Let me just see what the difference is. Because I don't really see it. Let me just, but nothing is pending, is not changing, data is not changing, error is not changing. Well, I'm a bit baffled why this isn't working. I would like to get to the bottom of it, but in the meantime, I can just show you the other sandbox that I've prepared. It's pretty much the same code. I don't know, maybe someone can spot the difference. So we have data, we have the options, we have our result, we have the callback, and then we have subscribe, and in here we track the result and we get the optimistic result again, and then there's the unsubscribe, and there's the render, and there we're also just accessing this dot result, and the rest is pretty much the same. And what's happening here is that when we're clicking refetch, we can see the refetching, but we are not seeing the perform update, because it's not called, because the component is not interested in that result. And if we go back and add the is fetching, then it's like happening all over again, right? So if we click refetch, it now goes perform update, refetching, render, perform update, render, like all the way through, even though we're using it, right? In terms of what React Query knows, if you're destructuring the variable, you are using the variable. But if you're not using the variable, and you're clicking refetch, then this is actually like the only difference is I'm using like this version 2.0 here, and an older version of, no, the latest version of TanStack Query. So I don't know what that is about. I also don't see a difference between those two sandboxes, but the thing is, if you remove the track result, that's kind of the function that like enables all of this, then you go back to like this behavior where it kind of like refetches and then performs updates again. So this was just like the last thing that I wanted to show, and I don't really, yeah, here it works. I don't really know why it's not working here. Let me just, I don't know, is pending and is loading? I hope not. Can't be, right? No, still doing update and render. That's interesting. I don't see any, like, I could diff the results. No, I don't see any real difference here. Anyways, that's how it should work, right? So that's like conceptually what we are doing in the framework specific layer. Is we are creating a new observer, we're subscribing to it, we are tracking the results in order to only re-render when it's necessary, and we are going to like use the results on here, and because of this, React Query internally knows like when it needs to update. And the thing I think is yeah, no, it's not about TanStack not changing the object reference. It's about that this callback function is not invoked at all, even though you click refetch and one of these properties are changing, this like callback function is like, once this callback function is invoked, it will obviously go and re-render. But this is kind of where it says, hey, this observer is interested in the result, please do something about it, right? And if something else changes, like TanStack Query can internally make sure that, I think this is then happening on this layer, right? The observer doesn't notify that the observer itself internally gets notified, and it then does the optimizations, but it doesn't actually notify the callback, the listener, which is used by the component layer. So this is where kind of like the break inside of it is. We're not going further than this when we're doing that. Okay. Right, let me show you the dev tools, even though I'm probably not going to put them in here. Let me actually go to, where can I see the dev tools? So we have docs on version 5 that are just here with version 5. If you go to latest, you will still go to version 4. That's important to know. But you can switch to version 5 to get the new docs. We can have a migration guide that contains all the things you need to do when you're updating. It looks like a lot, but it's not, I hope. So apart from this, but we have a code mod for this, so that should be taken care of for you. And we can now take a look at the examples. And if we do a simple example that is bound to version 5, I hope. Let's see if that works. DevTools version 5, yes, that looks good. If you've never seen the new DevTools, then be amazed, prepare to be amazed. I have to load again now. No, it started. Code sandbox. Fork. The suspense is killing me. Installing packages. 500. Come on. Yes, there it is. The new DevTools. Woohoo! They're also like, they open up with the new TanStack icon. So it's no longer the React Query thing. It's the TanStack icon because they're like kind of agnostic. And they have this nice like animation on it as well. And yeah, they have all the same functionality as before. They just look a bit nicer, I think. So yeah, woohoo! Thanks to Arian for doing this. And the cool thing is really, we can take the DevTools now, we can embed them in React, we can embed them in Vue, in Solid, in Svelte. Because all the DevTools are doing is actually, like, they're also subscribing to the query cache. So that's how you can see like all the updates, you see the amount of observers in here, you can trigger actions inside of it. This is all possible because the DevTools are basically just using the query core to subscribe to the whole query cache itself. If you don't know these features, I think they're pretty cool. They're the new ones. Like if you click on loading, you trigger the loading state of the query. Apparently, we've implemented this sandbox to unmount the DevTools if you go into loading state, which is pretty bad because then you can't undo it unless you reload the page. Of course, the DevTools should go up here, like outside of the example, because then you can actually also undo it. So this is kind of like one of my favorite features. I think we've also added them to the version 4 DevTools, and we also have them here. So if you trigger the loading, why are the DevTools not disappearing? Come on, that's not nice. That shouldn't happen. Because now they're outside of the example, and the example goes into loading state, right? So was it just, oh, I don't know. Okay, Arian, there's a bug for you. Is it same with the error? Yeah, same with the error. Huh. Interesting. I haven't seen that before. I thought that this was working fine. Well, something to need to look into, because what happens is when you trigger loading is the query goes into loading state, so you can test like the loading state, and then you're supposed to like click the button again, and then your query reappears. But the query dev tools are actually inside the provider, but outside of the example component. Somehow I don't buy it. Somehow I think like they haven't really like reloaded this. Yeah, see, it still says loading. It doesn't like, you know what I'm trying. Let's try this. This usually works better. It's like if you can't trust the things, how can you build something? It's like hot reloading. I never trust it. It's like always reload the page. Let's see if it works. The dev tools get the query client via context. Yes. That's why they need, at least in the React version, so that's why they need to be inside the query client provider, but they don't need to be that far down in your application. So they are here. Let's try this again. No, let's change the loading text. Oh, it's too fast. Come on. Okay, let's change not the loading text. Let's change something here. What? Oh, hello query. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so that works. So let's try this again. We trigger the loading state. Yes. Okay, we trigger the loading state. Not a query is in loading state, and it's in a suspended indefinite loading state. And you can click restore loading, and then you kind of get it back the way it was. And you can do the same with error, and you're actually getting like unknown error from the dev tools. So you can test out what happens if my query goes into error state, because I think error handling is something that gets left out a lot. It's also hard to test. You need to kind of like get an API that fails and so on. But with this, you can just say, hey, I'm triggering the error and then restoring the error state. I really like that. Yes, this is the DevTools that will be out with the next version. You can already use it if you are just going to TanStack Query version 5 and also use the DevTools of version 5. Nothing has changed in terms of what they can do and how you use them. So it's still the React Query DevTools that you import, and you can just render them. And then they are just a little bit nicer in it's like the offline mode you can test if you want. If you then click refetch, it goes into the pause state. You can like test how your query would behave if your user has no network connection, without actually turning off your network connection in the browser. Because like every time I want to test like offline situations, and I need to go into the Chrome like DevTools and turn it off, and then I reload the page, it doesn't work, right? Obviously, because Chrome says I have no network. So it kind of becomes like difficult. What this button is doing is actually it's moving your query client into this kind of mode where it thinks it's offline, and then you can kind of test around and see this. And once you go online again, you get this refetch on reconnect, where the query then is going to refetch automatically if it's a query that needs network connection to run. Yeah, so that's another thing you can do in the DevTools. And then here we can like move it to the right, for example, and do all these nice little things. Yeah, really cool stuff that we have here. Okay. Right, so now we've built the lid adapter for most of the time. Let's do some, I think I'm done with this, right? So this works, and it kind of like shows how to integrate, and this is kind of, I think you could do the same with jQuery, where you would just need to like somewhere find a way to subscribe your observer, and then somehow find a way to put the current result into the DOM or wherever you're rendering to, and then you're done, and you can use all the features of React Query. Because if we were to take a look at the actual implementation of use query, like it's all just TypeScript definitions, blah blah blah, and then it calls use base query, and then in use base query we have like a little bit of mostly suspense related stuff that's in there, which I haven't implemented yet. And then there's using external store that does our subscription. And then there's like, if the options change, we need to also update the options. I haven't implemented that in the adapter because we just use static options. And then there's like another suspense handling where we actually throw. And then there's error handling for like error boundaries. So most of the specific, like framework specific stuff that we have here is suspense and error boundary handling. And then there's the result tracking, and that's it. So it's like in React land, it's pretty much the same thing. We have another check for this is restoring, which is for our persisters, so that we don't actually start fetching while we are rehydrating from an external storage. But apart from that, and I think the other adapters, they're also like at most 100 lines of code. The React one is the most like involved one anyways. And that's it. That's the whole React implementation. The query client provider, like I said, basically it also calls like mount and unmount, and that's it. That's the provider. Like one effect, and then the rendering, and that's it. So really, all of the things happen in the query core, which I think is pretty cool because it makes it all portable and stuff like that. Okay, let me try to do the questions like in time-based order. Let's go back from the beginning. I think the first one was from Moshifan about maybe a question for later. Are there any good examples of passing your own custom cache in the wild? Any specific use case? Yeah, I think this refers back to the example that I've shown where you create a query client and you can pass a query cache, and then you can do a new query cache. And then query cache, you need to also import it from query core. So the thing is, you can't actually pass something else in here. You could maybe extend the query cache and then do something with it. Like you could create your custom one. But I've never really like seen anything like that or any use case for it yet. What we do have in version 5 is I wanted to expose the function to actually create our map internally, because the query cache contains a map for all the queries inside of it, and I wanted to make that public for people to actually like use. But there's also no use case for that because the map internally only contains queries. It doesn't contain the data. I mean, the query contains the data, but the custom map, the add and the remove, the add is only called once and the remove is only called once. So this whole like, yeah, I did that, the refactoring to a map, I did that on stream because I thought it was such a cool thing to expose this. But when you try to like listen to whenever something is retrieved from that cache, it's not actually called when data is retrieved, it's called when the query itself is retrieved or is set. So you don't really have a control over what gets put into the query cache, into the map of it. So it doesn't make much sense to expose it. I've since like reverted it and then put it back in, and now I've taken it out again. So it's still a map. The refactoring still happened, but the actual like exposing that you can have like this create store function, I think this doesn't exist anymore. But you could do your own query cache, like you could do class my query cache, and then you could do extends query cache, and then you could probably pass this in here. Yeah, that would compile and you could do some stuff with it. If you have a use case and you kind of like find something that where you need this, then let me know, because maybe there's a good example that we could do with that. I don't know what that would be, but if you find something, you now know that you can just like extend the query cache and pass it to the query client. Okay. The next question was, I think, from ES Codes. Hey TK, quick question. How do you feel about the app directory as of now? I think for some things, Query is much better at handling some data management than using server calls. Yeah, the app directory. I have written a blog post about it. So like for a long time, we've or I've looked at the app directory. It was kind of like, how do we integrate with this? This is like a huge chore or burden for us. People wanted to have like answers about like what's with the app directory, how does this work. Everybody wants to know, but I also wanted to know. Like I didn't know. I still don't know like everything. We still have things to figure out. But the latest blog post I've written is you might not need a React query. It's obviously a bit of a clickbaity title. I still think there are very good reasons to use React query, but there's one of the takeaways that I think I could highlight from this is that if you're starting a new application and you're using a mature framework like Next or Remix that has a good story around data fetching and mutations, you probably don't need React query. And there's a lots of ands and ifs in there, and lots of big ifs. And the focus is firstly on starting a new application, and that is not something that you do every day, and that is something that most of us don't get to do at work a lot. So there's kind of this stance of, yeah, if I have a current application, I will have a hard time migrating everything over like immediately. And you're using a mature framework, so Next.js and Remix are pretty mature in that regard, and has a good story around data fetching and mutations. I think server components still have to like kind of get the mutation story done. Then you probably don't need React query unless it gives you, maybe there should be an unless at the end, unless it actually solves a problem that you're having that those frameworks don't have yet. But I would still encourage you to, if you're using the app directory, then use server components and start fetching in there, and only add React query if it like adds something that you don't get from the framework out of the box. That said, I have tried it out a little bit in the last couple of times, and I made a let me just look this up on Twitter. I have written a like where was this? It was a discussion between me and I think I made a sandbox example. It's not too long ago. I tweet too much. Yeah, I don't fully understand. It was somewhere here where I made a sandbox example that was super weird for me to understand, because what I didn't know about React is that there is a client cache. Come on, why is this so? Yeah, I think it went down here. Made a simple reproduction. There it is. Okay, let's look at this code sandbox. I don't mean to like this Next.js or anything. I just didn't understand like how this specific example around caching would actually work. So what I was doing is I was just writing a page, and it was fetching some random number, and it was having a link to a second page, and then you go to the second page, and the second page does nothing except give you a link back to the first page, right? And what I had put here was actually like revalidate 0, because I think that's the way how you, like, per default, if you don't do this, the fetch would just be static, and that's the first thing that you probably like would need to know, is that this fetch then basically only runs at build time, and you get like a static HTML page out of it, which works fine if you're fetching like a list of blog posts from your file system or whatever. But if you actually want to have something dynamic and interactive, or something like that you fetch and display and that should be relatively up to date, right? This wouldn't work for a Twitter feed, for example. Like you fetch it at build time and then you just display it statically. So you need to know that you need to opt out of this. This was my first learning. I needed to opt out of this and kind of make this like, because now it's like, I think with this, it's like get server-side props. And without it, it's actually like get static props. So it's like static per default, which is something I didn't know. So I want to fetch this random number and render it. And this works. So when I reload the page, I get like a new random number. That's fine. And then I go to the second page, and then if I go back home, I get a new random number. And I was like, whoa, that's cool, right? Because like my thing is like revalidate 0, and it now reruns the page, and I get a new random number. That's what I expected. And if I put revalidate, I don't know, 30 in there, I could move around for 30 seconds and get the cached number, and after 30 seconds, I would get the new number, right? That would be very cool, and that would be how I had expected it to work. That's not how it works, because if I now like move back and forth, I'm always getting number 67, which makes no sense to me at all. Like, I now have 59, I go back and forth, I get 94, and then I'm stuck with 94 for like what seems like forever. I did get an explanation for it, not from like the Next.js team, but from others on Twitter, is that this actually is not, so the revalidate only describes like the server component, or the how the refetching on the server, the caching on the server actually works, or on your route level, right? And there's a second cache that I didn't know, but it's a client-side cache. So when you navigate to a page, Next basically caches the whole output of that React server components fetch request that you had in another additional client-side cache. And when you go back and forth between those pages, this cache kicks in, and it doesn't actually go to the server. So it can't even check if it should revalidate it on the server, because it doesn't go to the server. And now you're stuck with that static number. So if this is kind of like if I imagine I have like pagination, and I go to page 1, page 2, and then I go back to page 1, and I never get an update for it, that's weird, I think. But what I've heard is they're kind of like redesigning this client-side cache, because right now it's not very, I don't know if that is the where the explanation is. It's somewhere buried in here. Someone shared a screenshot somewhere. I don't know. There was a. It's not in the docs. So none of this is the second thing. None of this I was able to find in the actual docs of Next.js or React. But I think React has nothing to do with it. It's a Next.js specific thing. But what actually happens is that those links, they have this client-side cache, and you can this cache is on for 5 minutes. So now for 5 minutes I will have this number. If I were to wait for 5 minutes, those client-side cache would expire, and it would go back and it would see, okay, this is a dynamic route, I need to revalidate it, and it would get me a new random number. So the default is 5 minutes. And there is almost no way to customize this. The only way to customize this is if you pass, what's it called? Prefetch equals false to your link. And I'm also going to put this on the second link. If you don't prefetch the link, and I need to find this, like to tk-dodo prefetch, because it was a photo. Oh, come on, was this not? Someone sent a screenshot to me. I hate the Twitter search. Okay. I really want to find this, because if you pass prefetch, the takeaway is if you pass prefetch false, it's only cached for 30 seconds. If you don't pass prefetch called false, it's cached for 5 minutes. That's it. That's the customization that you get. I don't know where this was. Why is it so hard to search like on Twitter? And then it's over with the, probably started somewhere else. Was it here? Client-side cache is in memory, is rendered for the result split by segment. Did you find it? No, that's the other one. There it is. Yes, that's it. Cool. That was introduced somewhere. So if you have prefetch, if you have prefetch true, which is the default in Next.js, the client-side cache is like cached for 5 minutes. If you have prefetched false, then if accessed, it will if accessed within 30 seconds, after that it will refetch fully. And if you have prefetch undefined default behavior, yeah, the router will prefetch the full page for static pages and partially for dynamic pages. I don't know what partially means. But with prefetch true, I think prefetch true is the default. It will prefetch the full content for dynamic or static pages. So that's like dynamic pages, pages where you have said, I want to like opt out of the caching that you, of the static caching that you have. I want to always revalidate it. Maybe now the 38. Yeah, now I'm stuck with this for 5 minutes again, or for 30. So I could now do let's do this. Let's do a stopwatch for 30 seconds. Okay, we have 29 now, and now we have like 36, and now we have this 36, and now I'm doing 30 seconds. Wait a second. Where's my stopwatch? There it is, 30 seconds. Okay, 20 more seconds. And then like we could see that it's at some point in time now, it's not going to read from the cache, it's going to revalidate it. Okay, where's my stopwatch? There it is, 15 seconds gone, 36, 17. My watch is in sleep mode already. Jesus, I can't even do a stopwatch now. Okay, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Still getting 36. Did I not have this prefetch false? Anyways, this worked the last time. Yeah. So I was very surprised by this behavior. First of all, because it like wasn't really well documented, and I also feel that they rushed to get the app directory out a little bit, because I don't think there was a need to go from like it's in alpha to go to like directly, hey, this is super stable, right? I think there are like there's beta and release candidate and all things in it, but you know, things like this, the first thing I try out, of course, my intention was to try out to see how does the caching work, how can I revalidate stuff and so on. That's probably not what most people would be doing, but the two takeaways are that if you want to write a dynamic page, you need to like opt out of it for the first time. That is fine. That's probably like just a default that they've chosen. It's the complete opposite default of that React Query has, because React Query defaults to state time of 0, which means everything is instantly stale. We want to refetch and resync as much as possible. But that's something that you need to know, and it probably makes sense for everybody to just read the documentation top down completely to understand all of these things. But this client-side cache, that the only thing that you actually see is a pull request that has documentation on it. That really struck me as odd. And yeah, so that's my thoughts on the app directory so far. I think it's cool. I think I want to use it. I think I need to understand it a bit better, and I think the docs need to get a bit better. And you can say, yeah, that's all fine. You know, they docs don't come from like thin air. They need to be made. But I also wouldn't have said like this is super ready. You can use it everywhere if things like this aren't properly documented, or there is no resource to actually learn about these things. So that kind of caught me off guard a lot. Okay, let me just see if there are any more questions that I've missed in the meantime. Sorry, I didn't really read the stream. DevTools will be out in the next version. Yeah, and another question apart, how you feel about the app directory. Do you think React Query could be used to replace how next auth handles session and keeping session between tabs? I don't know how next auth handles sessions. That might be one of the things, but keeping sessions between tabs. So what we have is an experimental way to sync data from query clients between tabs, which is I think it must be here somewhere. But it hasn't been. It's the broadcast query client plugin, it's something that hasn't been touched in years actually, um, which is why it's experimental. I don't think anybody's really using it, but it's like something where you can sync the query client between tabs. And so like you have multiple tabs open on the same domain, and they use the same channel, and they will share the same tab. And the other thing you can do is you can something like write it to what I've seen people do is like write it to local storage with our plugin, and then have a second tab like just listen to the local storage and subscribe to it, and then just absorb whatever is in there. If that actually was the question, I don't know. So yeah, if it's about how you share data between two tabs, there are ways to do it. It's just not a very common problem to have, because if you have like the same thing open in two tabs and you just switch back and forth, you actually just get the refetch on window focus. That will kind of keep your data up to date. Yep. I think that's just a pretty simple way how I would do it. Okay. Question. Yeah, question. Are we talking about what to set the global? We are talking. Sorry. We are talking about what to set the global retry setting to, and are leaning towards 0. How do you analyze that choice? Okay, good question. So retry defaults to 3, which is something that I neither agree or disagree with. It's just a setting that has always been like that. I haven't questioned that setting. I'm usually adjusting retry. That's true, because we have and I'm usually looking at status codes when I'm setting retries. I have probably turned retries off for development mode, because when I'm working locally and I'm like connecting to our backend or an API, and I want to know when it doesn't work, and I want to know it instantly, right? I don't care if it's back up in 30 seconds or whatever. It's probably not the case, right? It's probably a 500 error. So for dev mode, I just turn it off. For production, we have it on, mainly because there are situations where maybe there is a short outage or a deployment going on or whatever that kind of ensures that you are actually redoing the request, and it might succeed. And it's usually not that big of a deal for people to wait a bit longer. It's probably better than seeing an error screen right away. So the idea is just to hide as many error screens as possible from the users, because they're always annoying. And maybe they reach out to support then, and you're like, yeah, just click the retry button or whatever. So that's a bit annoying. And we also have like the situation where sometimes, in very rare cases, we have like a quite complex system where one system issues a token and the other system needs to read it, and we store this, like we cache this token in a cookie. And sometimes this you kind of like come with an outdated information, and then that service rejects with a 403. And what we do is, in that case, we just clear the cookie and let the retry, grab a new token, and then it mostly works all of the time. So it's kind of like a maybe we have a bad system implemented, and we just have to try have you try turning it off and on again, and then oh yeah, I get a new token, I try again, and then it just works. So for those situations, it does make a lot of sense. Some people have said to me, like, can we not have like retries default to 0 for 404 errors? Because if something is 404, like, what are the odds that it really exists? And of course, the answer to that is we can't do that, because we don't know about 404 errors, right? We just have promises. Again, distinction between data fetching library and state manager. The state manager doesn't know about 404 errors, right? You know about it because you can handle the retries, because you know what you're doing with it. If you're have a query that returns promise.reject, like how could you check for a status code? So that's not how it works. So no, we can't do that. And the second thing is that even for 404s, I have seen use cases where retries make sense. For example, you could have a situation where you create a resource and afterwards you redirect to that resource. And for some reason, the resource itself is not there yet, or not ready, or I don't know, you have a distributed system and it like one system has created it and the other that actually delivers it doesn't yet know that it exists or whatever. It just takes a bit of time. So you redirect to that route, and there you get a 404 for that specific query, because it takes like 2 seconds until it actually delivers that new data, something like that. So in that case, it might even make sense to get a retry for a 404, even though it's like a very rare case. So yeah, if those are all things where you say no, still doesn't make sense to me, then by all means set retry to 0. That's why we have the default options on a global level. You usually only have to think about it once, and I have to admit that for the things that I'm writing, like I usually my new query client usually is like a lot of code. Like I make a query cache with global callbacks. I set error boundaries globally, but only like to a not even to a static value, but to a function. I'm setting error toasts on the query cache, also globally, and then the retry has like a big block of chunk for, turn it off for def mode, check some status codes. Some should retry, others shouldn't, and so on. But this is just like one specific global place that you can configure, and then all the queries that you have, they don't really care about that anymore. Yeah. And check the status codes. Yeah, that's what I'm doing as well. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Let me just see if I missed another question. One use case for React Query in app directory, okay, that I found is an example image that you have a widget that fetches data, and you want to have a loader on that specific component that show that you're in fetching currently next to the provided loading state when you fetch on the server. Yeah. So I think with like those revalidations, you don't get that fetching state back. And yes, this is like when it goes into super interactivity and also below the fold data that you don't need to like immediately render on the server and then stream down, you can still do client-side data fetching even if you do the app directory. So when we're currently still using pages, and when I'm migrating to the app directory, I'm going to take like the most basic things that I have currently in get server-side props, and I'm going to make them into server components. And those are also the ones where I have like a big stale time, right? We have some queries that have stale time infinity, like we have like a query that delivers the application version and stuff like that, things that really never change. So those are like super easy to create a separate route for it. Like one is a dialog that shows some versions. Pretty cool to have like the nested routes in the app directory, render just the dialog, still get the URL for it, right? And then just render this as a server component once. That I don't even care about this client-side cache, that it never like revalidates. It can be static as much as it wants to be. So these are the things where I'm looking forward to migrating it. Or maybe like we do have a sidebar. I mean, most apps have a sidebar. We do have like a header bar that's pretty static. So we basically just pre-fetch it on the server, put that data into the query client with the hydration, because we want this page to actually like render the skeleton as an HTML on the server, even though it's behind the login and everything, but it should still like not have these layout shifts on the client, and like all these loading states around, or like a big spinner. But then when it gets to like the really dynamic details, like after the interaction of the user, or maybe once they scroll down and then they start to adjust the settings and whatnot, it probably doesn't make much sense, at least not that I know of now, to just refactor all of that to server components. We probably just keep our data fetching the way it is until we find a reason not to. Okay. because a while back I was asking about next auth and query with app directory. It does not break, but with pages it does. I think you closed the issue a while back. Okay. The issue was with next auth. Let me remember. There was an issue. Oh, was it the reproduction with the Create T3 app? I think there was. I remember getting a production with this doesn't work, and a Create T3 app, and then the thing was that there were a million other providers and things like that in there. Yeah, and dehydration didn't work because the way next auth sets up the things. We can take a look at next auth real quickly. I remember looking into this. Yeah, what they were doing. They have like a provider, right? React, or maybe, yeah, index. Is there a provider in there? Yeah, there's the session provider. Session provider, yeah. And the way the session provider is done is it just runs a use effect on the client, and yeah, and then it calls set session in here, and then here is set loading false. And the problem with that is that React Query uses using external store to actually read correctly, I would say, from an external store. And when you do use effect plus set state, you actually get into problems when you go into this concurrent rendering. And this is happening when you do the streaming in Next.js in the app directory works fine. It breaks in the pages directory. Huh. Interesting. There is no streaming in the pages directory. Yeah, you said it's. Reading this now. Yeah. What happened to the issue on Next.auth actually? Let's take a look at that. I thought that this was interesting. Is this not linked to the other issue? Ah. All right. Well, the way I was seeing it is that this kind of set state was then re-rendering the component, leading to a different output from client rendering versus server rendering, and then that's where the hydration mismatch came from. And it started to work really well once we removed the provider. So yeah, I was moved to discussion. Yeah, this one here. There isn't much going on. Still, I'm going to subscribe to it. You know, I want to know how this turns out. Sorry that it doesn't work or it starts to break, but I don't think that there is much that we can do on our end to do this. I haven't seen anything in our code that indicates that we should do something differently. Okay. I would say I have about 10 more minutes, or maybe 15. We could take a look at what's new in version 5 if you want, or if you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'm just going to talk a little bit about version 5. Let's see what's the best way to go about this. Probably the migration guide, but let's skip all the breaking changes. They're boring, and go to the new features if we have them. So we did. This would be good to do, but that probably takes too long. Can you show an example of how you use React Query in a production app? Well, the things that I work on are not like the things that I work on for work are not open source, so I can't show them. We could try to set up a more like production realistic example, but I don't really provide the code. Yeah, I don't know what production-like app is. I mean, a production-like app is like a to-do list, just bigger. I would say if you follow the same um, like principles or whatever, then I'm really hoping that you can go from small examples into kind of the bigger ones just by knowing the concepts behind it. But it's I think it mostly depends on how you learned the stuff. If you learn the things by example, then it's probably a bit harder to adapt once the things change a little bit. But if you learn by understanding the concepts, then hopefully you can take those concepts and apply them to slightly different but yet similar situations. Um, okay, let me quickly show you the optimistic updates, because even though I'm not a big fan of optimistic updates, I think this is one of the cool things that we will have in version 5. And that is, like, if you know optimistic updates, let's maybe go to the optimistic updates guides, talking about understanding concepts and stuff like that. I think it's much better to look at the guides than anything else. So if we take a look at the standard way of doing optimistic updates, it's usually this, right? So what optimistic updates do is they let you see on the screen what something would look like before you actually make the update to the server. And to get this going, you need to hook into 3 different callbacks. One is the onMutate, which happens before something is sent to the server, where you need to basically go into the query client and update data inside of it. So if you add a new to-do, you just have to append it to the list. And in this case, you need to kind of like duplicate the logic that you have on the server, but you need to do this manually. And then you need to return a snapshot of the previous to-dos, because if your query errors, you actually have to set it back to what it was before, because this is kind of like the pessimistic, like the thing that can go wrong. In an optimistic update, you're kind of like super optimistic and say, yeah, it can work, but even if it works 99% of the time, it still sometimes doesn't. So you'd want to set that value back to what it was before, and then in onSettled, you can obviously invalidate it and just refetch the latest value. And that works, and it's actually, I don't think it's too bad, but this is the part where things get hairy most of the time, because it's not always just appending a thing to a list, right? In this example it is, and that's where we're kind of back to, okay, how do I take this to a bigger example? It would mainly be just this, right? It would be, okay, I need to insert it at the correct position because I have a sorted list. Maybe I have multiple lists I want to insert it into, and we need to go into set queries data, where I can write into multiple caches at the same time. In some cases, setting the correct data is quite hard. Yeah, how do you, Java update? Okay, perfect. Exactly what I need. Yeah, how do you get the new data? How do you do IDs, right? Where does, do you need a negative ID? You need to write this to the cache. Do you need to, sometimes those things are like here to do is just a string, but sometimes you have objects with lots of properties and all of them are required. Where do you even get that from, right? So in order to write it to the cache and for your application to work, it needs to actually have the correct structure. So you need to kind of sometimes conjure that data out of thin air and just make something up or whatever. So that's kind of hard, but it's also you write it to the cache, and at the moment you write it to the cache, every subscriber gets notified about it. And if you use that query in 5 different places, then all of them will automatically have the correct data. So this is still the most correct way to do optimistic updates. But if we take a look at this example, we just have a new to-do and we just want to append it to the list, right? It's not why do I need so much code here? And actually this query cancellation is quite important, because otherwise what can happen is that at the time when you're actually making the update, if there's a background revalidation going on, it would actually overwrite your optimistic update, because we just write to the query cache, and the query cache doesn't care where data comes from. If you put it in there manually, it's in the cache. If a refetch happens and writes data in there, it's also in the cache, right? So there even if you're like, if your update takes like a lot of time for whatever reason, your mutation, and even if there is nothing going on at the moment, um, if there is a revalidation starting, because like the user, like while the mutation is going on, the user goes back and forth, and then you have another revalidation starting, it would still override it, because this cancellation only runs once at the beginning. So there are still cases where your optimistic update could get overwritten by actual server data, because it's not actual data at this time. So a different way to see it is, what if you wouldn't need to write to the cache? What if you could just like look at the place where the mutation happens and take the data that you are actually mutating and append it to your list of to-dos in the UI? And I have to be quite honest that the first time where I've seen this was in a remix example that Ryan Florence did. And this was like super inspiring, like, hey, this is a really cool way to do optimistic updates. And I think other frameworks like Solid Start, I think, also do it that way. And with query version 5, you can also do it that way. And the way that I mean is basically this. So this is like ignoring everything that's happening below. Let's just look at this. This is the only thing that you need to do in your mutation, which is I run the mutation. It's the same as like here, update to do. It's just here I have it written out with a post request, update to do, and then in onSettled we invalidate the queries like we did before. Except that the really important part is that you have to return the promise that you get from the query invalidation, because this actually makes sure that, so we are like internally, we are awaiting the promise that you return, and your mutation will stay in pending state or in running state as long as the whole mutation is running. But for this kind of optimistic update to work, we actually want to prolong that state. We want to say our mutation is actually active until the mutation function is finished and the actual invalidation is also finished, because my mutation is seen as done when I actually get the latest data back from the backend, right? When I've finished the full circle, then I would like to see my my mutation to be finished. And that's what you're doing by actually returning. And maybe I could make this more explicit with like the curly brackets and then a return statement, because this is just an error function with an implicit return. But it's really important that this promise here gets returned, because it makes sure that our mutation stays longer in this pending state. So if we take a look at our to-do list, what our to-do list usually does is it kind of maps over all the to-dos and then renders them. And what we can do with the new feature, where we are actually getting back variables from use mutation. So variables is just a field that you have passed into the mutation to actually execute the mutation. So we are now getting that back from our mutation call. And that means we can say, well, in my UI, I'm just going to render my to-do list. And if my mutation is running, I'm going to append a like slightly different rendered to-do thingy at the very end. Ignore the key. I don't know why I have the key here. That's a bit unnecessary. You also get like a timestamp when the mutation was submitted in case you have multiple things to render. But here we just have to append like the, if my mutation is running, I'm going to append that like that one to do at the end in my UI, right? Because I only have one place to do it. And that's like a really easy thing to do for these like very straightforward situations, I would say. Because what happens is that while your mutation is going on, we will render the normal to-do list with our, say, 5 to-dos, and then the 6th to-do will be rendered in this like opacity 0.5 style right underneath it. And then after the mutation is finished on the server, the invalidation will kick in, and the invalidation will then refetch, and once it's done, it will return all the 6 to-dos. And at the moment it has returned all the 6 to-dos, that's the moment where this mutation is no longer pending, and that's why we have to absolutely return it here. And then if the mutation is no longer pending, this list item will not be rendered, but it will already be in here in the items, because then our items will have like 6 entries because the invalidation has already completed. So in the UI, what will happen is that we have like 5 normal items plus a grayed out 6th one, and that will actually turn into a normal item once this is all finished. So all we need to do is really decide how do we want to represent our UI while the mutation is running, and if that means appending an item to a list, we just do it here in the UI. Of course, this works best if you only have like a single point where you're rendering it, like your to-do list. If you're using your query, say, a second time somewhere in your header where you are displaying the count of your to-dos, right, then it still works best with the cache example, because the moment you write into the cache, like I said, all these subscribers will be notified about it, so your count will go to 6 and your list will also like be appended correctly. But you would, in this example, you would actually have a harder time to render it differently. So here I can just say, well, this list item gets a different like style. In this example, I would probably have to set, like here it's just strings, so it's actually really hard. But if this is an object, I could add like an is optimistic true or whatever flag to it. And then at this point, I could check during my list rendering if it's an optimistic item, and then I could render it differently. So yeah, that's how it works. And you can even do things like, if the mutation errored, you're going to render it, and you could do a retry button that actually runs the mutation again. That's a pretty cool thing. I think I have rewritten the example in version 5 for the mutations. Let me just really quickly see if we have that optimistic updates. Let me just see if that works, because if it works, I think it's a really cool fork it and convert it, like just go to the new stuff automatically, please. All right, and then we're already over time. This is just the last thing I want to show you. Hello, Romain, good to see you. Yep, it's 2 hours. Actually, is this a good time to have a live stream? Because for me, Friday, it's like it's 8 p.m. And now it's 10 p.m. For me, this would be a good time to do this more regularly. I just was struggling to find a good time for. Yes, I have rewritten it. Cool. That's how it goes. Let's see if this starts. What? What is this? Document is not the what? What is a Fat Friday? Okay, close and stop task. Let me just start a new terminal. Please work. What is this? Okay, it's from the DevTools. I'm going to remove the DevTools. Yeah, there it is. I don't know what's wrong with the DevTools. I'll talk to Aryan about this. No, it's not a next step. This is just some client-side rendering. Oh, that's cool. You order different food from different cultures in the office. Is this the company is paying? Is that we have this once a month, I think, or twice a month. I don't know. Okay, so back to this example. How this is set up is that it posts a to-do somewhere, and it randomly fails, and then it returns it couldn't add the item. And the way the optimistic update is implemented is that we are rendering the to-do list like we had in this example. If the mutation is pending, I actually don't need the key. We are rendering the list item in an opacity style. And if the mutation is in error state, we also don't need the key. We are rendering the variables out, and we are rendering a button next to it. And you can actually retry the mutation and say mutate again with the same variables that we had in that mutation. So how this turns out is if I do like hello. Yep. So what this backend also does is it kind of like two uppercases the text that you send in so that you can actually see what's happening. So if we type in world, we can see it's in opaque, and then we see the updating in the background, and then we should see if it works or doesn't work. And in this case, it hasn't worked, and we're like, oh no, we couldn't insert this world here, so let's retry it. And then it runs again, and then the second time it worked. So that's what you can do with like a couple of lines of code. Styles opacity 0.5. Here we have just a red color. Woohoo! And we can clearly see like when is the query running, when is the mutation running. Let me just show you what happens if we don't return the invalidation. So if I just void that here, the invalidation will still happen, but invalidate. What happens is, no, that didn't save. Definitely not. This one here. Yeah, and this one. Okay, so let's try this again. Okay, ABC. Yeah. So have you seen that little flash where like the data kind of disappears and then reappears? And that little flash happens. Yes, the text is gray and only later the loading message is shown. Yes, the loading message comes from the invalidation. So the loading message comes from, I think it's down here. It is fetching and it says updating in the background. That's what's happening. So if we're not returning the the promise from the invalidation, what happens is that our mutation is seen as finished as soon as the post request is finished. But when the post request is finished, we haven't really done the update yet. So, but at that time, it will take away our mutation because it's no longer in pending state, and then the item itself will be missing. So we could do another one. We can see it's here, now it's gone, and now it comes back again, right? So there's this kind of like this flash where it goes out of the state again. But if we actually return the promise, we can see that the item stays on the screen in a gray state until the invalidation is finished, and then our server value will replace it with it. So let's do the hello again. It comes in. Oh, I didn't save. Come on. Reload this. ABC. Yeah, so now you can see it stays on the screen in a gray background, and then it comes turns into the correct value just after it's the update is finished. And I would like to see an actual error again. Yeah, there's an error. So now it kind of like, oh no, this errored, so we're rendering it in the error state. We can also just leave it like this here, right? We can do AAA. Oh, we can't because I haven't implemented that, but there is a way how you can also do like keep it on the screen, have the error button right there, and then have other things like be rendered underneath it, and just keep all the errored items on screen with multiple retry buttons. I haven't done this in this example. There's a different way to do it. There's a new hook that allows you to do this. It's called use mutation state. So maybe really quickly, the way why this doesn't work is because use mutation only tracks the values of the latest submission. So the moment you click create this mutation tracks like this value here, and it cannot track older values. There's like a common thing where people said, well, why can't I call use mutation with like the same key in multiple components and get the same data? Because that's not how mutations work, basically. And what you can do in version 5 is we have a new hook called use mutation state. And what use mutation state does is pretty much what it says. It subscribes to the query cache and gives you the state of all the mutations. And you can say, I want them to filter down to only the pending mutations, or I want them to filter down to only the ones that have a specific mutation key. And then you can say, I want to like kind of a select optimization on top of it. I want to say I want to select only the variables out of it, or I want to select only the data of those mutations out of it. And the use is mutating hook is actually built on top of use mutation state now. So it only kind of like tries to find all the query or all the mutations that are in the pending state and just gives you back the number of those that are running. But with this hook, you can actually like filter it down to your mutation key, and you can then get access to all the mutations that were run previously for that mutation key, because mutations also stay in the cache for 5 minutes. There's also a cache time, or a GC time, how it's now called, for mutations. And so you can, with use mutation state, you would get access to all the previously running mutations, and then you can render them on the screen. You can say, I want to select all the errored mutations, and I want to render them in their correct, error state, with the retry button next to them. And then you also get access to the variables. They are also stored in the state, so we know exactly with which variables you try to make that failing request. And then you can say, okay, when I click that button, I'm just going to run a new mutation that runs for this specific mutation. And then actually at this point, you are going to get a new mutation. So at that point, it might be a bit tricky to kind of like delete the old mutation from the cache. I'm going to take a look at how this would turn out, but I might have this ready for like the next stream if that's interesting. I think would be pretty cool, because it's kind of like a good use case to show how you can keep things like mutations in the cache and like get access to all the state of mutations that you fired in the past. Okay. Whew. Yeah, that's it. There are more things in version 5. I think I could like talk for hours about version 5 because I'm pretty happy with it as of now. Yeah, request to the next time, an example of storing a failed mutation due to network to fire when you get the network up. That actually works out of the box, but like if you just said, if you give mutations a retry and you don't have a connection, they will just pause and then fire up again when you have a network connection. It gets more tricky when you want to like build a real offline app and you want to persist that mutation to local storage and then fire it up again when the user comes back to the app, right? So maybe building like a PWA or maybe React Native application, and like you can let the user work offline and then store the mutations on disk and then fire them up when they open the app again. So that's even better. Any release date planned? Yeah, I don't know. We spent quite some time figuring out like these server rendering stuff with the app directory, and we still haven't figured out what to do with suspense, because now you can use suspense on the server as well. And then you couldn't do this in pages directory, but that would just fail. But you can do it in the app directory. But we're not sure yet if we want to stick with a suspense Boolean flag or if we want to have like a new hook, use suspense query or something. If you want to keep up to date with things in this regard, follow Frederick. He is our main maintainer for everything server-side rendering, streaming, suspense related things. He knows a lot about these things, much more than I do. And this is pretty much where we like what's currently a bit blocking for moving it to beta, because once we are in beta, I want to pretty much do no planned breaking changes. I mean, if something comes up, we have to change it, of course. Like if something is totally wrong, but at least then I want to say, okay, no more changes are planned. And right now we do have breaking changes planned, but they're only around suspense and data fetching in that area. So suspense is still experimental, at least in React Query at the moment, right? So that means if that's not of a concern to you, then please feel free to use version 5. I think it's as Moshifan said, it's very. I don't see why it wouldn't be stable, right? It's most of the things are refactorings of like changing the syntax, like removing stuff. We've just removed stuff, so it's, and then added some good new stuff. But if you have like a small app where you want to try it out, or if you start something new, feel free to give version 5 a try. It's also about like release dates are, the more feedback we get, the more confident I would be to actually release something early. So with version 4, I got a bit like branded, where we didn't get much feedback for 6 months, and I thought, okay, cool, everybody who's using it kind of like likes it, and the moment we released it, people started to use it, right? The usage starts when you say it's stable, but you know, what does stable mean? We're just like devs who ship stuff, and yeah, if more people try it out, we can find things earlier. That's the thing. So it's always it goes both ways, right? We need to actually like write good stuff and write good tests and think things through. And I've been doing this a lot, but then it also comes to people trying it out and giving feedback. So I would really appreciate that if that's what people would be doing, trying things out and giving feedback. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. With that, I'm gonna go to sleep because I'm pretty tired. Thank you everyone for joining me. I hope it was entertaining, and see you around and next time hopefully. Bye everyone.